welcome, or as they say in Finland, tervetuloa, to episode number 2 of Cape Ann Fins, which I will immediately begin by turning to our sponsor for a word, which is founder, director, president, Rob Ranta of the Cape Ann Fins.
Thanks, Wayne. The Cape Ann Fins as a group was formed to preserve the culture and heritage of the immigrant Finns here on Cape Ann and the first group of Finnish Americans. And this recording today contributes to that preservation. We've chosen to come here to be certain that all of as wide an audience as possible could discover about the Finns who lived way back as far north on the Cape as possible, beginning in the 1860s in Lanesville, and then in later years in Pigeon Cove and Rockport. Our purpose today is twofold. I've mentioned already about broadening the reach of our presentation, but second of all, to talk about the Fin Fun New England Weekend that Cape Ann Fins, partnered with Gloucester 400, is hosting October 27th to 29th, both in Rockport and Gloucester. The day with the most activity is in Gloucester at Gloucester High School from October 28th from 9 a.m. So we'd invite all of you to come. The one place that you can go to get most information is Fin, that's F-I-N-N, fun, one word, FUNN.org. And there'll be more information about the Fin Fun Weekend. You don't have to be Fin to have fun, so we want you to join us. Now, to my left is Wayne Soiney. He's a Cape Ann Fins member and historian and an author in his own right. Then to his left is Fred Peterson, a Cape Ann Fins member, and I like to think of Fred as the institutional memory of all things Finnish on Cape Ann. And then to Fred's left is John Urkala. And John, he's the person who has over the years collected so many pictures of the Finnish community and broadly Granite and such. And so since so many of us are now image-oriented, his contribution adds a lot to the dialogue that you'll hear today. So I'll turn everything over now to Wayne, who will introduce today's presentation.
It gives me great pleasure. Thank you, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope people will attend Fin Fun. Often people associate Finns with an introverted, kind of passive and very quiet lifestyle. So they wouldn't normally associate fun and Finns together. But I think you've managed to do that. Let's talk now with Fred Peterson. And Fred, I understand that you can trace your family's background, including some photographs, vintage photographs, of their time originally in Finland and then coming over and settling actually in Cape Ann. Tell us more as you're going to. We'll start off with the photo of Jukka and try and get that, and you see. Go ahead.
Jukka is in the eastern central area of Finland, not too distant from Russia. And obviously history has indicated that there's been some problems over the years there. But the Kokkonen family and the Kortelainen family are from that region in Finland. It is also called the lake area or lake region of Finland. And also located there was the occupation from one of my grandfathers as a quarry worker, not in granite as we have here, but this was in soapstone, a much softer type of formation Actually, you can actually carve things with a jackknife or a knife out of soapstone. So his background started in as a quarry worker.
Fred, I think you pronounced the town's name very carefully. Would you tell us more about that?
Well, there are a couple of rules of pronunciation for the Finnish language. One is there are no silent letters. Every letter in the speaking of Finnish is sounded, so that, and without exception. Of course, we're Finns, so it's definitely without exception. And therefore, Jukka is a classic example, because it's a tendency to look at the two U's there and say Jukka, and it is pronounced Jukka. You have to sound both of those U's. The other rule simply is the accent is on the first syllable of every word, regardless of its length.
May I ask, Jukka, it reminds me, are you aware of the Finnish word for river?
No, I'm not.
Well, river is joki in Finland.
Oh, yeah.
And Jukka actually is a derivation of that word. If you have a river in Finland that runs into a lake and then runs out of a lake, it just goes through the lake, that's not a joki, that's a Jukka. And that's what this represents. So near the town was in fact a river that ran through a lake, in the lake region, as you described. I'm going to move on now in another good view, vintage photo of Finland. I think it's the last one you have from Finland. Tell us about this picture.
This is the home that belonged to my great-grandfather, the Kortelainens. Somehow, I think the Finnish language, or the Finns love the sound of the word K, because our family name is Kokkonen,
Yes.
and then Kortelainen. And maybe they like the sound of it, but you'll find that K quite prevalent. But the great-grandfather is standing in front of the home there. He is left of the front door, right by that small shrub. But that is my grandfather Kortelainen.
Now, when they moved from Finland, came over, I guess, to Boston by ship, and arrived in Boston, took a train up to Rockport, and when they were in the station, they had to figure, when they arrived in Rockport, your family in the 1890s had to figure out where to sleep the night, where to spend the night. They already knew where they were going. Where was that?
It was to Pigeon Cove portion of Rockport, and actually the destination would be the house, the
Kivy House?
the Kivy House.
Otherwise known as the Stone House.
Yes. the Stone
And I
House.
think you have a photo you can show on your manually.
Oh my God.
There it is.
We go this way.
You have a picture of us. It's a stone house. Is it still standing
Yes,
on Granite Street?
on Granite Street. It is opposite the office on Granite Street. There's a road down to the Granite Wharf, which separates that from the company store, which is a white building, and just after that is your Granite House, the Kivy House.
If I can ask then, this Kivy House has a meaning in your family as the first what?
Place they slept.
The first place they
in
slept in-
Rockport, actually
in-
Pigeon Cove,
in
part of
Rockport.
Rockport, yes. But also, just to clarify it, is that my grandmother was the daughter of the Kortelainens, and she married in Finland to the Kokkonen, Antti Kokkonen. They were married and had their first child in Finland. So as they came here in 1892, they came as a family.
And that's where they had a room. Was that for a night?
Yes.
At the Stone House. Did they stay?
Yes, they
Resided?
stayed a few nights, and,
Okay.
and he obviously signed on with the Granite Company to work in the quarries.
We may have a picture that you can look and tell us what it is.
That is a house they ended up in a later time. They had to rent for a period of time. In fact, the first house was off of Phillips Avenue in that area, Grand Street, Phillips Avenue. They rented there for a short spell, and they then acquired this house eventually from the Rockport Granite Company. Because at one time, as Dad said, they used to have as many as 20 people living in there. It was a rooming house for the quarry workers as well as their home.
So while they were living in it, they had an opportunity to make a little income from the renting out the rooms in the making a board.
I don't know what the business aspect of that was.
Okay.
Whether the Granite Company got their cut out of it or it worked the other way, but
Yeah.
I really have no information on that whatsoever.
Well, that's fair. But there is a family depicted here. Tell us more.
This is my grandfather and grandmother, along with, we'll go left to right. Left is Axel Kokkonen Peterson. The name was changed from Kokkonen to Peterson by the Granite Company. They had difficulty with these strange sounding names and hard to pronounce, and so they asked through an interpreter my grandfather's auntie, Andrew, his first name of his father, and it was Pekka, P-E-K-K-A, Pekka, and which is Peter in Finnish. So you're Peter's son. And there are a multitude of Finns in this area with Johnson, Carlson, Peterson, Nelson, and derived the same way, really.
Axel's the one
The
on
far
the
left,
far
then
left.
my Aunt Anne. Next is my father, Carl. Next is Maria, my grandmother, and Auntie or Andrew Kokkonen, my grandfather. And to his left is, or in the picture, his right, is my Uncle Altie, or Alfred.
All right, and they're standing in front of what their own house.
Yes, well, it may not have been in their ownership at this time.
All right.
But it was,
Ultimately.
maybe it was a cooperative deal with the Granite Company, but they ran the household, and they were quarry workers rooming in there, because it was a 15-room house.
All right, and I think you said your grandfather was in Finland, a quarry worker.
Yes, the
So he
soapstone.
knew what to do with quarry
Yes.
equipment. All right, now that brings us to the fact that many of the Finns who came over were quarry workers, or at least came to become quarry workers, even children. There's no child labor law at the time. And you have recognition. What is this picture?
This is Blood Ledge Quarry in the off of High Street area of Lanesville. It's known as one of the deepest quarries on Cape Ann.
You wouldn't say that Blood Ledge is from some accident or...
You know, the owner happened to have a last name of Blood.
All right.
So there was
And-
no need of first aid or any.
May I say, this kind of resembles the people were, I mean, this is deep. The little dots that look like ants are people.
Yes.
And this is an enormous quarry. All right, the next thing is a picture of one of the quarry workers.
This is when they came in with the steam hammers, as opposed to doing everything by hand. And actually, just to go back a little bit to my uncle, his job, being older, was a striker. And
What is a striker?
strikers, there were two of them. They didn't carry a placard, they weren't on strike. But they had, and then one of the youngsters, like my dad, he started at 10 years old as a tool boy, and carrying the box of drills, sharpened drills to the various sites. And but also one of their jobs was to hold the drill and quarter turn the drill, which is larger, for the blasting holes. And you had a striker on each side swinging about a 12, 15-pound sledgehammer, drilling a larger hole, diameter hole, for blasting.
What is the Jacob Solney, I guess is the name of the worker. What is he doing?
He's
in
probably doing the same thing in later dates when they went to the power. But this replaced the two strikers that were drilling the.
Two strikers were out of a job because this guy could do it by himself.
They ended up with one of these in their hands.
Oh, I wanted one of the. Have you got any artifacts that you can show?
Well, what he has in it would be his right hand is this wrench, and he's using this to quarter turn that drill, so that it cuts evenly. Otherwise, if you held it in the same spot, it would jam up in there. You've got to keep that hole going at an even basis. So
that's what you were talking about which was formerly done by the strikers.
Yes.
And he's doing it himself.
Because with the strikers, you had somebody like my dad at 10, 12 years old sitting or kneeling and quarter turning that drill by hand as they were striking on each side.
Tell us a little bit, what were the hazards of that job for the strikers or the people who were working here with the drills?
Obviously a mishit, but you only allowed one. But
if you had an explosion, you mean? Yeah, okay.
No, I was talking about missing the drill.
Oh, missing the drill.
One of the strikers missing the drill or off hitting it and ricocheting and hitting one of the youngsters holding the drill.
All right.
So they would develop the rhythm and the technique. You all know when you go into a restaurant, there's someone playing a piano, and they can look around the room and talk to you and everything, play the piano. Well, these strikers developed that same technique. Dad said he could stand there and talk to his brother, and my brother would look him in the face and still be hitting that drill.
You mentioned he was walking around with some kind of equipment in a box or something?
That's the tool boy, and we're going back now to the younger responsibilities of the workers in the quarry.
Even at age 10?
At age 10 is when my dad started.
Up on the walls, like
they used ladders.
Blood ledge?
They used ladders and some to get to a certain level in the quarry, a ledge area. And then there might be the next ladder, maybe several feet or whatever, yards apart on another ledge. And Dad had an expression. When you went from ladder to ladder, you kept your belly close to the wall.
Belly close to the wall.
That was the expression. Because they had on their backs, well, it would be the length of to hold the drills, which are 18 inches or 20 inches or whatever in length. They'd have several of those in a wooden box with a leather strap over their shoulder, and they had to balance that going up and down these ladders.
Right. I can understand. All right. Now, your grandfather, I think, although he's not pictured in this, had a small quarry which was called a motion. Tell us more.
Well, the motion, it depends on who you ask. Sometimes a motion is limited to one or two people. In this picture, there's, I believe about 10 people in that picture. The young fellow at the center is obviously learning all he can in the trade, and the other fellows obviously were working with them. And that's the motion because it really wasn't that large in size, but you can see in the lower left-hand corner where there's stone already cut and ready for use. So that this is a quarry that he developed on his own property.
There's a motion in Rockport, Pigeon Cove.
Pigeon Cove,
okay.
Up on off of Hillside Road.
All right. I mentioned his picture is he's not in this picture. Why not?
Shy Finn. Typical.
All right. Now, schooling in those days. Tell us more about what you know.
Well, we have a picture coming up. It should be, there it is. It's the Reed School. It's on, the building is still there, private home. It's on Story Street at the corner of Story and Pigeon Hill Street. There's a little dome on top of the building that perhaps had a bell at one time. It looks like it might have been that, but it was a inclusive of grades 1 through 6 in there. My dad is in the far back right-hand corner.
May I inquire, because people are going to be surprised. This isn't one class like the 3rd grade.
No.
This is all the students
in that area.
In that area for grade 1 through 6 in a one-room
yes.
schoolhouse.
Yes.
Taught by one teacher.
Yes.
Okay. I've got to say, what came next? We'll go to see.
This one is taken at the school. This schoolhouse was off of Granite Street. The building is still there. Again, it's a private home, but to locate it geographically, it's just about across from the Granite Garage off of Granite Street. And so this is...
What grades depicted?
This goes up through grade 8.
So this would be 7 and 8 grades.
Right. And Dad has used his... I think he wrote me on that.
That pen, somebody wrote in a pen.
Yeah.
It says me.
Well, yeah, that's Dad. And
All right.
He was a 7th grader at that time, he said.
All right, 7th grade. And many people in those days did stop after 7th or 8th grade
Yes.
and go to work. I guess that was true of your father?
Yeah, he finished 8th grade there.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to say that they did that, but in church there was a whole thing about making sure you knew your Bible, and I think those classes were taught in Finnish. You tell me more when you...
Yes, they were taught in Finnish, and Dad actually went to Lanesville for this class. This class is taken in the Lanesville church area.
We have in front of us, we're looking at it, rippikoulu. That is confirmation classes, taught in Finnish, and you said in Lanesville. A minister's picture is in there, along with many students. The women or the young women wore white, and obviously the young men wore suits and very serious expressions on what they had. Any idea who's in this picture?
Well, Dad would be in the back row, starting 3rd from the left. In the back row is my dad. The center picture, in the center of the picture, of course, is Reverend Ronka, who was the pastor at that time at St. Paul's in Lanesville.
And any
And
other?
this Runsala, Claimalas, these are all people I knew the families. Niemi, there are several. Oman, we had some Oman family living near us. And Wayno Peterson, I really don't remember who he was, but he had the same last name. And my dad is listed just below him in this list I have. In fact, he was baptized Carlo Arnold Kokkonen Peterson.
That's your dad?
My dad, yeah, he's in the picture.
And I take it that you could go year by year and find these names again appearing as their brothers and sisters in these large families went through rippikoulu, the confirmation classes. In time, though, church aside, you had to go to work. What does this show?
There again is the homestead, and the kitchen that goes into the kitchen of the main house. My grandmother on the left, my Aunt Ann on the right, and that's my dad, Carl Peterson, in the background. And
Why
he was
does
still,
he have an apron on?
Well, he was still working for the Granite Company. He was out of the quarry, but he was also the delivery boy on the horse-drawn cart that the Granite Company had. Well, actually, if you go into that area now, the White House, the company store, it still exists. And the people who live there, fortunately, have left the front of the building the same. And if you look at it, there are 3 arches that are comprised of wooden arches in the front of that building. And that's where they backed the horse-drawn cart up to that loading area. And Dad said the one on the right took care of the town of Rockport. The one in the center was Pigeon Cove and part of Rockport, maybe part of Lanesville. Yeah. And the left one obviously was all the way to the Bayview. There was a big rooming house there in Bayview. And that was the last stop. And Dad really enjoyed that one because it was an overnighter. And he had a chance to, pick up a few things he learned from the old Finns in the and spending nights there. Yes.
I think you've gotten for us, in fact, it might be courtesy of John Urkala, a picture of the horse-drawn wagon you were talking about. I don't know if a better picture might exist that you could show of the occupation in those days.
Yeah.
And this is where you say the last stop was Bayview, and it was an overnight.
Yes.
And you could listen in on the conversations of the older men and what they
Yeah.
discussed probably was
We
women.
learned a little bit about life, yes. I would say.
I'm sure. Now, besides those kind of jobs, people had often farms, a cow or pig, or grew. They didn't just have jobs. They also at home grew gardens and so forth. What is this picture?
This is 5 acres that my grandfather acquired from people who owned woodlots. A lot of these settlers in the Cove and in Lanesville and Rockport area would purchase, and I don't remember the specific, they didn't vary, they were usually the exact same size, but they were woodlots where they could harvest wood for their whatever need they had. So as a result, my grandfather was able to acquire enough of these house lots or woodlots to total 4.8 acres. And then he had the rest to make a little over 5 acres was the entrance lot to Hillside Road that allowed him access. And the people who owned those lots in the day had access over other lots to get to theirs. There was no problems there.
Now,
But
besides
he,
this hay lot worked by the men, was there anything done on the farm by the women?
Well, I just want to add one more thing, if
Yes,
I could,
please.
on this, before I forget
Oh,
it.
I'm rushing ahead to the woman, but you go ahead.
We have in our records, he paid for one of the lots that he bought with a load of cow manure.
Hey, that's quite a story.
Yes.
All right.
I wanted to get that one in there.
All right. It must have been good stuff, I'll tell you. All right.
It worked.
The slogan is just as good as the cow can give. But anyway, here we go. What is this show?
Oh, that's my mother, and she wasn't a native of Cape Ann. In fact, she was born and raised in Red Lodge, Montana, but that's a whole nother story.
Did that mean that she knew charm school, or what did you do out there in Montana?
Montana, she did a little bit of everything, I think, but here she pitched right in, no pun intended, to to show that she knew how to work and pitch hay as well.
Hard
from
work.
her youth, yes.
I don't want to conclude without showing a picture of a house. It still stands, a little bit remodeled, but you tell us what this shows.
This was purchased by my dad in 1945. It's on Oakland Avenue. It's there today, and it was again a quarry rooming house. And what it, for me is interesting is that I spent most of my youth living in what was a quarry rooming house. The homestead was with 15 rooms. This house had 8 rooms. You can see the 2 entrances. It was the old timers version of a duplex because it was divided directly in the center. There were 2 cellar entrances out of stone. There were the 2 front doors. Each had a kitchen with the old soapstone sink. And that was the extent of the plumbing. In those days, it was the old lead pipe plumbing. And there was the usual 4-holer in the backyard. And he purchased this in that condition, as you see here. Chimney is a little bit stubbed on the roof on the right. That went down a storm probably.
Even the Rockport schoolhouses almost in those days had outdoor plumbing. But I don't know when exactly they stopped that. But your parents brought this in 1945, and pretty soon we'll see how they remodeled it. And the next picture is a view of that same house. But
Yes, same house. This is probably in the late 50s. You can see he took away one of the entrances and built a vestibule, so a single entrance, put 2 A dormers and to add a window to each of the front corner bedrooms, and on the back roof area, he put what they call a shed dormer that had twin windows, one for the bedroom on that side, and put a full bath upstairs, which there wasn't.
And as I understand, you're saying he did this, you did this too. I guess you took part.
Well, yeah, my brother and I both, we did a lot of different jobs to help Dad.
It wasn't a matter of bringing in a carpenter, a contractor, and having these changes made, but
he
it
did
was...
everything himself, the carpentry, the masonry, the electrical, plumbing, all that.
And self-taught.
And yes, and
Right.
and the two-car garage, he added that
On
as
a
well.
what, did you say, a 7th, 8th grade education?
Yeah, 8th grade education.
8th grade
yes.
education.
Yeah.
All right, and one more picture I'd like to conclude with. You can tell about the family at this point.
This, as far as I know, I had been told that this is the last picture that included the family, because I'm not sure of the date that my grandfather, Antti Kokkonen, passed. I know he was still with us when they had the murder on Oakland Avenue.
1932.
Okay,
Yes.
well,
Okay.
I believe it was 33 that he passed not long
Passed
after.
away after that.
But he was interviewed as a suspect, you might say, in that, because his home was in that area, and word too was that the house was searched, looking for any evidence or whatever.
Okay. And last picture of him, but who else is in the picture? And then we'll conclude.
Well, it would be my grandmother beside him, Maria, and my Aunt Anne, and then there's Uncle Al, my dad, and Reverend Kokkonen. He legally, my uncle Axel, legally changed his name back to Kokkonen.
Okay.
He was an ordained Finnish Lutheran pastor from Suomi College, and he didn't want to spend a lot of time explaining what I've had to do to why his name was Peterson.
All right. I'm going to thank you for that. We've gone full circle. We began with Finland and a picture of your family when they were younger, and now we've gone into this last photo and the new to them 1945 house. It was former boarding house for quarry workers. I thank you so much for this tour. Be able to turn it over now to John Urkala, author of books about Lanesville and Pigeon Cove. I take it you're an expert because you grew up in Lanesville, and being a social climber, you married a girl from Pigeon Cove. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
That's all right. Tell us more.
Well, I
You
had to move-
could go through the pictures.
Yeah. And speaking of Pigeon Cove in Lanesville, she dragged me over the line to live there, so I
Oh, there you are. Yeah. Well, you
had no choice.
You had a choice of living in Beverly Hills or
Yeah.
some other place. You're going to live in Beverly Hills. Okay.
Okay, pictures. The first one I talk about is it's one of Lane's Cove, back in the day when they had the coal bins there, Harvey's Coal Company. The coal would come in by barge and be unloaded and then distributed throughout the area.
If I understand, those barges actually went up and down the coast, and even some went to Europe,
Yeah, that could be. That could
right?
be. And of course, the other thing going on there was the granite industry. Of course, they shipped tons and tons of granite paving blocks out of Lane's Cove, and that you can be sure the Finns were very involved in that one, handling the paving blocks.
I shouldn't leave off from Lanes Cove without saying, we've looked up in the census records, first Finns, the 12 Finnish families that were listed in the United States Census for Gloucester, all in Lanesville, all around Lanes Cove area. They didn't yet go over into Rockport or Pigeon Cove. And so Lanes Cove essentially was ground zero of the Finnish settlement of Cape Ann.
Yep.
And it grew from there. Please go on with your pictures.
Yes, and as I say, the other use of the cove, of course, was for the granite industry. It was mainly that, and fishing. They used a lot of fishing out of there. There were a lot of Finns involved in all of that. The breakwaters rebuilt many times because of the storms would knock it over. But right now, it looks to be pretty solid. I don't think it's going anywhere.
It was, I'm sure always the granite company wasn't displeased if the sky was darkening and there was storm coming,
Yeah.
because they knew their product would be needed again in
Yeah.
Lanes Cove.
Right.
Yes.
But of course, the granite they were shipping out never moved. That's right there. That
Sure.
didn't go anywhere except onto a ship to be sent somewhere else in the world.
Okay, what's the next picture you have for us?
The next one is Langsford Street in Ranchers Market.
Ranta's
Ah.
Market.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the Ranchers Market became the local one up into the 70s. And before that, it was a co-op and 2 other Finnish names operating it. It was a popular spot.
Well, what we're describing in Finnish, may I say, Finnish is a hard language for English speakers to learn.
Right.
The reverse is also true. Finns would have a hard time learning English.
Sure.
I think if you're Swedish or German, there's some similarities. The vocabulary, vetter is weather, and you know things. But Finns is so different. So these people that settled in Lanesville and Pigeon Cove were Finnish speaking, and they would tend to go to a store where somebody spoke Finnish more than among the English. So Ranta's Market was, among others, the place to go.
Absolutely.
And that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Very popular place among the Finns.
If I could interject here.
Yes.
The Finns, by other, nationalities and the English and such, always thought of the Finns as clannish. But when you think about the odd language that the Finns spoke, it had nothing to do with the Indo-European languages that all other, mostly other immigrants came with that would be closer to English. No wonder the Finns were thought of as clannish, but they had to. They could only talk to one another.
Talk to one another, and in the example Fred gave, your name wouldn't even be pronounceable by the English, so they would change your name from one to another, and his family became Peterson. Please go on with your next picture.
Yes, the next one I have is the Locomotive Nella, which was one of the steam locomotives used in the quarry days, one of 3. And that operated in Bayview. Excuse me, not Bayview, but the quarry right under the Stone Bridge, hauling granite out to the wharf to be unloaded to go on ships. And then it was switched over to Lanesville. It ran through the woods from Bianchini's or Bay State Quarry down to Pigeon Cove Harbor to unload granite.
Right. I think growing up in the days we are, Dogtown Common is a very quiet and natural place. We wouldn't imagine anything other than an occasional train from Boston coming through. But in those days, you'd have to watch where Nell would be coming through the woods with some granite.
Imagine that.
Right? Through the woods. Please go on.
Yes. And these, unfortunately, these locomotives disappeared over the years. Some got scrapped, some got sent away, and nobody really knows where they went to.
We're left with pictures, as so often with other things
Yes.
about the Finns.
Exactly.
Go on, please.
And the next picture I have is of the Keystone Bridge.
The famous
The
Keystone
famous,
Bridge.
built in
The
1872.
one and only Keystone Bridge.
Yes.
Yes.
In 1872, that was finished, and it remains to be there to this day in perfect condition. It never had any repairs. The granite was all fit together, just so, and it was paved over, of course, with the town, and it's just, some people don't realize what they're going over when they drive over that bridge.
Well, I know when we do a bus tour as part of the Finn Fun, I'm going to have to say to the people a little warning before we get to that bridge, that it's a bridge with only stones and no mortar. So how do we cross that bridge? Very carefully.
Exactly.
Please go on from Keystone Bridge.
Yes. And of course, under the bridge, they had to dig that out, that area, so they could haul the granite from the quarry, which is the other side, right down to the harbor with the locomotive. They did it by carts first, but the locomotives really did the job. Locomotive, one motor. And so that was a very, very active spot in its day.
What next is on your agenda on screen?
Yeah, the next one is actually it's one of the locomotives hauling the granite down to the wharf in Folly Cove, where they loaded on ships from that area also, which was a popular place in later days for a dance hall, outside dance hall.
That place, Folly Cove, has never ceased to have its draw for people, cars, restaurants, dance halls,
Right.
quarry work, everything to do with the activities of Cape Ann, reflected, I think, always by Folly Cove. I'm glad you brought that image.
Yeah.
What else?
And the dance hall was called Rendezvous.
Yes.
And people came from all over because there's live bands and dancing in the evenings. And you had to pay so much to dance. And it went on for quite a few years, but then during the winter, mysteriously, it burned down. No one seems to know why that happened, because there's no electricity there, there's nothing, no fires, but it disappeared to be lost forever.
Well, I've got to ask you, Rendezvous, dancing under the stars.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's a dance hall, but no roof. Literally, the band was playing in the open air. Is that right?
They had a roof over part of it. I
Part
think
of
the
it,
band
okay.
was probably in part of it, but
Okay. Fabulous place. Too bad. Burned down.
yeah.
Okay. Which happened to some other places in
Because they put a lot of, I just,
In the 50s.
Some of the old
Yeah.
hotels.
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyhow,
They put a
before
lot
we
of-
go into those, what else do you have besides the Rendezvous?
Yes. That's again, this Lane's Cove, with showing this big load of granite being ready to be shipped out.
I'm delighted with that picture. Others will notice your mother wrote a book on granite, the granite industry, and you might just mention that.
Yes, it was titled Hammers on Stone, The History of the Cape Ann Granite Industry.
It's really one of the more popular books at the library, and also has a following anywhere where somebody wants to know something about the Cape Ann industry and the granite industry. That's the book, the go-to book.
Yes,
And thank you for
exactly.
that. All right.
And unfortunately, it's out of print. It's very hard to locate now unless
Yes,
you find one
yes.
on eBay or somewhere like that.
My father was fortunate enough to have your mother give him an autographed copy of Hammers on Stone.
Yes.
Our family's mentioned in there as
Yeah,
well.
Mhm.
yeah. All right. I think the Cape Ann Museum exhibit includes some reference to Hammers on Stone.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And there's a lot of granite tools and other things tied in with the granite industry on display there.
Yes. All right.
Pretty good
Can I ask a
representation.
question?
You are going to ask a question.
Question, sure.
Well, this is the president, director, founder asking me whether he can ask a question. He's paying for this program.
I was just curious, of course, we are representing the Finnish experience on Cape Ann, but who did the Finnish quarry workers work alongside of?
Swedes.
Okay.
Italians, yes.
In fact, the Italians did more of the fancy work,
Right.
the carving.
That's right.
Maybe it was the artistic flair they had, but they did a lot of that work. But the Irish, and maybe a few Scots thrown in, but it was a variety pack.
And
John, I think was mentioning before we began, Bianchini?
Yeah.
You have some.
I had the experience of splitting granite, the large blocks of granite to be shipped and used at a wharf in Lane's Rockport.
Right. So you yourself, in a strange way, you were for a bit in the granite industry.
Yeah, got to do it.
Splitting
yes.
granite.
Yes.
Okay. And the Bianchini quarry.
Yeah.
Okay. Next on screen.
Yeah. That would be the all the way over to Lanesville now and seeing the athletes at Plum Cove. The Finns had lots of athletic events going on. They're very athletic people. They all like to exercise and stay in good shape.
Speak for yourself, John.
Well, today it's a little different. Anyway.
Langsford Street, was that given a name, something like the Holly Woods or something? What is
The name of the hall.
The what?
What was the Finn Hall called? The
yeah,
Temperance Hall. Wayno Hall.
Right, but I mean...
No, you mean the athletic field. There's
Well,
another one.
they had athletics at the Wayno Hall.
Yeah.
But they also had what I guess you have on screen, the Langsford Street Woods.
Yeah, yeah, that's,
with
yeah.
competitions outside,
Yeah.
like the Finnish Olympics.
This picture's Plum Cove, though. Plum Cove, right
You
across
got
from
one
the
from
beach.
Plum Cove,
Yes.
with a field across the,
Yeah.
yes. And I'll call it Robert Natty's field, because he was known, I think you told me, Fred told me about Robert Natty's swing. If he contacted the, you know, with it, if that bat contacted the ball,
Gone to the woods.
it was gone.
Have to go look for it in the
Outside.
woods.
That's gone. But what next other than the Plum Cove field?
The next photo is Bayview, where the granite industry was really active. They did all the finishing work there and design work, and the granite was hauled in there from the quarries to be processed and then shipped out. There's a wharf right there for the ships to...
Are we talking
the way.
Hodgkins Cove?
Yes.
Like that, okay.
Yep.
Where eventually was the Lobster Company, Consolidated Lobster Company.
Yes, when the granite industry went out, they converted some of the buildings to be a wholesale lobster company,
Okay.
which took seals in the winter. Pet seals, I'm sorry.
Pet seals?
Yeah.
I went in there.
You mean like seals,
Yeah,
give us some fish?
Yes,
Seals?
one of the neighbors up there had pet seals in his small quarry.
Right.
And in the
Really?
winter, the Lobster Company agreed to keep them in their tanks.
Oh, I remember hearing about that, yes.
That was Mr. Worcester.
Did they eat lobsters, though? What did they do?
I don't know, they must have fed him something.
I would hope so.
Can I add something about the Plum Cove and the athletics? The Wayno Hall had a wonderful athletic club and very competitive, and really won a lot of the competitions around the state and locally.
John's father, Arnie Urkala, was
Yeah.
one of those
That's
competitors
correct.
and champions. But
And
go ahead.
of interest to people in Cape Ann is that the trainer was Bernie Pratt, who for a long time was in phys ed, involved in phys ed here. in
All of the
Gloucester Public
schools.
Yeah,
Schools.
sure.
Many,
Yeah,
many,
Gloucester High.
Yeah.
many of us would remember Bernie Pratt.
Oh,
very
yes.
fondly, yes. Ah, right. I like that.
Yeah.
There's a connection. So, what are we on to next?
That's the listing I have.
That's what we have. All right. Now, I'm going to just finish off with a few things on screen that we'll look at here. I'm sort of hit or miss on this, looking at this. By the way, these are kindly from Valerie Nelson, photos that she's gathered for the Lanesville Community Center. Many of them are Finns, not all of them. But let's just say, for example, Wayno Band is in the top row center. The Wayno Band was in all the parades, all the activities. It was a tremendous, what is it, oompa band.
Brass band.
It made
Yeah.
some noise, and it was easy to listen to. The Wayno Band, these were people all with other jobs in their week, and then they would practice on a Sunday morning. And at one time there was a church, the Lutheran Church, St. Paul Church, was very near to the Wayno Hall, and if it was a hot day, the church windows would be open, and the windows to Wayno Hall would be open, and the parishioners would be treated to listening to the sermon and simultaneously the Wayno Band.
Oh, yes.
But those things, in upper left, top upper left, Antti Sirjaniemi record. This just is one example that Finns in Cape Ann put out records. What's the Antti Niemi, I think it was named.
He shortened it to Niemi. Sirjaniemi to Niemi.
Right.
Oh, that's what. So that's the same thing as Antti Niemi because he shortened his name. And he had a store in
Pigeon Cove.
Near
the tool
It would be
company.
well known even up into the 1960s. People would remember him. And he put out records which were sometimes in the Finnish language.
Yes.
I don't know many. It's sometimes instrumental, but I don't know if he put any out in English. But
Not that I
certainly-
know of.
I don't think so.
He also wrote his own.
Yes, and
He was composing.
Yes, he was
And
composing.
was it his daughters became
Yes.
accordionists?
Famous.
They're famous in Finland as well
Right.
as
Yes.
they played in New York.
his recordings were also humorous. You know, some of them were
Very much
funny.
so,
They were
yes.
takes on other popular Finnish players and such.
Right.
We have one of the records that he wrote, recorded, and he gets telling some funny story, and he gets laughing so hard he could hardly talk for a
He
while.
could hardly talk. Hey, the cook likes his own soup. It's wonderful. Just one other picture I should point out. In the second row on the right, Vern Niemi and Wally McGrath. Wally's still with us, a member of the Cape Ann Finns, and plays still with the American Legion Band in Rockport. But Vern Niemi was well known as a teacher as well as a musician. I think he was on the Gloucester High School staff or
Rockport High.
Rockport High
He
School.
was a band leader at Rockport High.
And Wally was in the family and had to learn
Yeah.
to play the
Yeah,
clarinet. I think.
Wally was his nephew.
Right.
Wally was his nephew, but he was a captive student. In other words,
Oh,
he had
yes.
to learn, he had
Oh,
to
yeah.
practice. And he told us this nice story that when he would practice, but in between the lessons, if it was possible, he would bang and dent he was hoping to put out of commission this instrument so he wouldn't have to practice anymore. He never, it was indestructible, whatever they made it out of. So, but this is a picture, it's an ironic picture of him and his teacher, Vern Niemi and Wally McGrath.
And Vern also had a dance band over the
Yes.
years.
Yes,
And the
yes.
dance band was populated by Finns.
That
Right.
might
And
even be,
my dad was one, played the clarinet and saxophone.
that might even be on the next page, next picture. Let's just see what we have. We've got different people here. You can tell us the Barnacle Bazaar up in the top, the Langsford Street trolley, which there was past Ranter's Market,
Yes.
the Ahola Barn, soon to be the Lanesville Community Center, but the Ahola Barn dairy, we remembered as originally in the 50s, they still had cows there. Sylvester Ahola, the famous, internationally famous, as you were saying about others, Finnish musician. And Sylvester Ahola grew up in this area of Lanesville with the Ahola Barn. And as I recall, they said from the very beginning of his life, his parents didn't want him to be a dairy farmer. They wanted him to be a musician. And he practiced, he enjoyed it, he did like it. And he wore a white shirt. You know, the farmers didn't wear white shirts. He was in a white shirt and was very, from the beginning. We have some other pictures here. Let me just move this picture, or move one page and see, oh geez. Upper right in the top.
Must be one of the Niemi.
Viola, no, this is Viola Torpinen.
Oh.
Viola Torpinen was not a Cape Ann Finn, but she was prominent among when they have guest musicians from other parts of the country. She came in, Viola Torpinen, when they had her play at Wayno Hall. It filled more than filled the place, and there were people outside standing listening to this music, angelic music of Viola Torpinen.
Yeah, she's quite
Fun-
famous.
Well, famous, and then the funny story, she retired to Florida. People thought very fondly and kindly of her. She retired to Florida. My grandfather's brother, Matt Celines, went to Florida and knew that he would like to see her. And the word was that she liked to receive beach stones, you know, those round sea wash beach stones for the sauna stone. You can use them as a sauna stone. So he brought a bucket on a plane. Now, it must cost money.
Oh, boy.
He brought a bucket from probably Front Beach or something of the of stones to Florida to give to Viola Thorpe. But the word was she liked those. She appreciated it. So he did. He was told, "Yeah, thank you for this, and can you put them around her back?" So he did, and he found that he was pouring them into a like a box where there was a sign. She was selling them.
Oh.
Selling them as sauna stones.
Right.
But anyway, that's just funny.
If you could go back to the one you had on before,
Yes, I will.
please.
I will.
Okay, the lower right
Yes.
is the last group of
Oh.
the Cape Ann Finnish singers.
Oh, yes.
Now, that group, years before,
And you were part of it.
I was part of the last of the Mohicans. Yes,
Yes.
I was in that group. But I started with that group back in the '80s when we were up to 18, 20 people. You had both Natty Boys, Billy and Bobby, and you had that many singing in it. I don't remember all the names now, but in the '80s we were up to about 20 singers, and we'd sing at all kinds of functions.
Both in Finnish and in
Oh, yes,
English.
yes,
And
we
may I
had-
say you were dressed in Finnish costume?
Yeah, we
traditional
all had
Finnish
some
costume.
form of a Finnish recognizable costume. Yeah.
They all sounded pretty darn good, too.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we rehearsed. We
Yes.
worked at. Well, we had some great voices in it. Bob Natty had
Oh,
one
yes.
of
Oh,
the
yeah.
one of the most beautiful bass voices you'd ever want to hear.
Well, we could talk a longer time about the Cape Ann Finns and music, even just a program by itself on music. We're not going to do that. We're in the last few seconds of this show, and it has gone by speedily. I want to thank our guests for their contribution to the preservation of the Finnish legacy. John Urkala, Fred Peterson, otherwise known as Kokkonen, and Rob Ranta. I'm Wayne Celines. We'll be with you next time. There's always plenty to say about Finns, even if they don't talk too much themselves. I mean, that's the way we are sometimes, right? Only reason I can
Correct.
talk is I'm half Irish.
Yeah,
I
there you
end up able to talking. Anyway, thanks very much. Hope to see you again. The Cape Ann Finns episode number 2 is now concluded.